Hello and welcome. I have the pleasure of giving you an introduction into corrosion protection, what we do here by focus lighting to enhance the lifetime of the luminaires. My name is Flemming. I'm the International Sales Director with Focus Lighting based in Denmark. But first, I would like to let's focus on what is corrosion protection or corrosion issues. We have this old luminaire, which is the socket of a luminaire, and you have the screen on the top. Here you see a highly corroded luminaire. You see the paint is peeling off. You see that the raw aluminum is damaged through corrosion. So you have here surface issues and top coat issues. And another thing that you would also have on this luminaire is actually the galvanic corrosion. Here you see two screws that are mounted through onto the pole. These are made of stainless steel and they are corroded here in this case with the aluminum housing. In order to remove this housing and the luminaire from the pole, we actually had to cut the pole. So this is a part of the pole which you see here. So this is a kind of a luminaire that we did more than 10 years ago, but still it's, let's say, belongs to wall of shame, you know. But again, this inspired us to take the next steps in order to provide for very high corrosion protection on the luminaires. So if we stay with the topic of galvanic corrosion, then one of the measures that we have done on the same luminaire is that we have the stainless steel screws here, but on the inside then we have a stainless steel plate. And then behind the stainless steel plate, we have a protective tape that cuts the touching to the aluminum housing away. So there's actually no physical connection between the screws and the aluminum housing. So that's one of the galvanic corrosion measures that we have taken. On other places on the luminaires, when we have stainless steel screws, they go into either coils or other protective measures in order to prevent any kind of a connection between the stainless steel and the aluminum. The next thing that we do when we look at the surface paint, keeping the surface protected over a lifetime, then what we have to look at first is actually aluminum quality that are used for the housing. Here I have a luminaire. It's just the aluminum mold. What we do and what we have found out is that we have to reduce the copper content of the aluminum mold to lowest possible content. In all our exterior luminaires, we do not exceed 0.5 copper content. So we have a very pure degree of aluminum in our molds. That is the first step in order to provide for corrosion protection. Then after this mold has been done, then the luminaires are washed, they're polished, they're cleaned. So we have a cleaning process, and after the cleaning process, we put on a primer. Again, a primer that has to fit to the aluminum and has to have also a layer thickness of a certain thickness in order to provide for corrosion protection. And on top of the primer, then we have the top coat or the surface paint. And again, the primer and the surface paint has to match one another in their qualities. And in both cases, we use the best quality that we get on primer and top coating. So, in order to verify if we are good, then we took these luminaires that we make today and one example of what we made previously. We took that to a test laboratory in Sweden called Proton Laboratory and had them to perform a so-called Volvo test, which actually comes from the manufacturer of trucks. And we had to make a test where we resembled a 10-year endurance test in a road environment. So what we did was, we could have a look at the sample that was produced 10 years ago. If we go close to this luminaire, you would see the scratch that is made on day 1 in the test procedure. And then you can see you have blistering around that one, around the scratch, which is actually then the beginning of a corrosion process where the primer and the top coat would be peeling off after a certain number of years. This is after 10 years, and is not to a satisfactory quality. So what we did over the years is that we have improved the aluminum mold, the aluminum quality, the primer, and the top coat. And here you would see what we call the C4 standard surface. Again, they have made a scratch, and after 10 years, you can see there's actually a little bit of blistering around this scratch here, which is the first step of the paint going off. But it's far better than what we had on the previous luminaire. So in most cases, this would be a very sufficient quality. This quality would last at least 25 years in the field under normal circumstances. When I say normal circumstances, I say weather circumstances and not coastal areas. But if we're moving into coastal areas, we also have the offering of what we call the C5 quality. There we have other measures in order to improve and make the surface even more robust. And if we go close to this one, again, looking at the scratch, there's actually no blistering around the scratch. And this is after 10 years of use in the field. So this is the best quality that we can provide for a high surface corrosion protection. What we then did said, okay, that was the Volvo test. Let's try to stress the luminaires even more, especially if we go into very close proximity to coastal areas. Then we took the luminaires into a salt chamber test. And a salt chamber test is a test that lasts 1,440 hours, the constant spraying of salt in a chamber. Here we have the same housing as we saw on the C5. And if we move close to this one, again, look at the scratch. There's actually no blistering, there's no corrosion. You have the scratch which turns a little bit more white or grayish, but there's actually no loosening of surface coat. So this is extremely high quality of a surface protection. And just for the comparison, we did put a luminaire in with just the aluminum mold housing, just to see how would that look after the salt chamber test. And this is how this one would be corroded when it had no surface protection. So you may imagine that this is a very tough test procedure. So we have the Volvo test, we have the salt chamber test. And these are the verifications that we have achieved a very high quality. The employee at the test center said he had worked 30 years in that test center and he'd never seen such a high quality on a luminaire, and asked her, how do you do it? Another thing that we did experience in our development process was that we could also anodize our luminaires. Because we have such a low copper content, then we can actually achieve a anodization. And here you would see a luminaire which has been anodized, and this bronze coloring of the luminaire comes from the natural process of anodization. So you see the remarks and you see how the aluminum has floated into the mold, but actually it's a very unique and beautiful surface. Do we turn our attention to the protection, the corrosion protection, then you see again the scratch. It turns light grayish, but there's no damaging, no corrosion to the housing at all. We cannot qualify this due as C4 or C5 because these tests relate only to painted surfaces, and anodization is not painted. So we can't compare that to the standards of C4 and C5. but we would at any time say this has a high coastal protection. This would not corrode at the coastal environments. And besides the high protection, we achieve this very beautiful, unique surface on the luminaire. I think that was the words to corrosion protection with focused lighting. It was a pleasure that you listened in. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.